You don't need millions to scare a bank. You just need enough cash to stop needing them. Think about that for a second. Not rich, not flashy, just enough money sitting there that if life goes sideways, you don't panic. Your car breaks down, your boss calls you into a meeting, rent goes up, and instead of fear, there's space. That's where things quietly change, because the financial system understands debt. It understands desperation. It understands people who need credit to survive. What it doesn't like are people who can wait, people who can say no. And around $30,000 in liquid cash is where that shift starts. Not freedom in a dramatic sense, but something more dangerous than that. Calm. Here's the strange part. That level of savings doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how the system reacts to you. And most people never realize that. Because quietly, beneath all the marketing about high-yield accounts and financial wellness emails, banks don't actually love customers who hold too much cash and don't need them. That's what this video is really about. Not fear in a dramatic movie villain way, but a subtle discomfort, a loss of leverage, a shift in power that most people never talk about. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When money is tight, your brain doesn't plan, it negotiates, and that changes everything. Rent coming up, a car repair you didn't plan for, a credit card balance that never seems to move, that constant low-grade anxiety humming in the background of your life. We're told that the solution is simple. Earn more, spend less, be disciplined, open the right accounts, follow the rules. And when we think about banks, we assume they're on our side in that journey. After all, they talk a lot about helping us save, helping us grow, helping us plan for the future. But that's only partially true, because banks are businesses, and businesses are shaped by incentives, and the incentive structure of banking doesn't revolve around you being calm, liquid, and independent. It revolves around you needing them, needing their credit, needing their approval, needing their products to bridge the gap between your income and your life. That's why the idea of someone with $30,000 in readily available savings is more disruptive than it sounds. Most people misunderstand what real financial stability looks like. We're trained to think in terms of net worth, assets, long-term investing, retirement accounts you're not supposed to touch for decades. Those things matter, yes, but psychologically, liquidity matters more in your day-to-day life than almost anything else. Liquidity is the difference between an emergency ruining your week or just annoying your afternoon. Liquidity is the ability to meet unexpected expenses or make changes without stress or loss. Cash, checking accounts, savings accounts, money you can access on a Tuesday afternoon if life throws something unexpected at you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The average person doesn't have much of it. Many people can't cover a few months of expenses without borrowing. Some can't cover a few weeks. And that reality shapes behavior in ways that go far beyond money. It affects the jobs we stay in, the conversations we avoid, the risks we don't take, the boundaries we don't set. When you don't have liquidity, you are, in a very real sense, negotiable. You tolerate things you shouldn't. You accept terms you wouldn't otherwise accept. You stay quiet when you want to speak up. And the financial system is built around that quiet compliance. Every time you swipe a card because you don't have cash, someone else gets paid for your stress. Not in theory, but in practice. They earn interest when you borrow. They earn fees when you misstep. They profit when you carry balances, roll debt forward, and rely on credit to smooth out an unstable financial life. What they don't earn much from is someone who parks $30,000 in a basic account, rarely overdrafts, doesn't need loans, and doesn't panic buy financial products. That person isn't broken, they're not reckless, they're just independent, and independence is hard to monetize. This is where psychology quietly takes over. When you have very little liquidity, every financial decision feels urgent. You're constantly optimizing for the short term. You're thinking in days and weeks, not years. That urgency makes you more receptive to offers, more likely to accept unfavorable terms, more likely to trade future comfort for present relief. A credit card limit increase feels like breathing room. A personal loan feels like a solution. Even a slightly predatory product can feel like help when the alternative is stress. But when you have $30,000 saved, something shifts. You stop reacting, you start choosing.
That car repair isn't a crisis, it's an inconvenience. A job loss isn't immediate disaster, it's a problem with options. A bad financial offer doesn't feel tempting, it feels unnecessary. And from the system's perspective, that's a problem, because fear is profitable, urgency is profitable, dependence is profitable. Calm, liquid, self-directed people don't generate the same revenue streams. This is why banks love the idea of savings in theory, but prefer it capped, conditional, and psychologically framed. Save a little, but not so much that you stop playing the game. Keep money locked away in places you can't easily touch. Tie it up in products, committed long-term. Liquidity, real liquidity, gives you leverage, and leverage changes relationships. Think about it in everyday life. Imagine two employees in the same role, same salary, same skills. One has a month's expenses saved, the other has a year. Who can negotiate harder? Who can walk away from a toxic environment? Who sleeps better on Sunday night? It's not about arrogance, it's about optionality. $30,000 for many people represents something close to a year of basic living expenses. Not luxury, just survival with dignity. That buffer changes how you show up in the world.
You're less desperate, less reactive, less easily pushed. And when millions of people don't have that buffer, the system quietly adjusts around that reality. This isn't a conspiracy, it's inertia. Structures form around common behavior. When most people live paycheck to paycheck, products evolve to serve that condition. When debt is normalized, systems become optimized for it. Liquidity breaks that pattern. Now, I want to be very clear here. Banks aren't sitting in rooms plotting against savers. That's not how this works. But incentives don't need intent to shape outcomes. If your business thrives when people borrow, then people who don't need to borrow are simply less interesting. They're harder to sell to, harder to extract margin from, harder to influence. And influence matters more than we like to admit, because money isn't just numbers, it's behavior. When you don't need a loan, you can say no. When you don't need credit, you can wait. When you don't need approval, you can decide on your own timeline. That's the part that rarely makes it into financial advice. We talk endlessly about returns, about percentages, about optimizing investments. We talk far less about what money does to your nervous system. $30,000 in liquid savings doesn't make you rich, but it does something arguably more powerful. It quiets the noise. That constant background stress most people carry, the one that influences decisions even when they're not thinking about money, liquidity turns the volume down. And when that happens, you start making different choices. You might choose a job that pays slightly less but treats you better. You might take time off between roles instead of jumping at the first offer. You might invest more thoughtfully instead of chasing whatever feels urgent or hyped. You might even realize you don't need as much as you thought. That's another subtle threat to systems built on consumption and debt. Contentment is hard to scale. The turning point for most people who reach this level of liquidity isn't a financial epiphany, it's an emotional one. They realize they're no longer afraid in the same way. Not fearless, not reckless, just steadier. And that steadiness changes everything. You stop checking your account compulsively. You stop feeling like every purchase needs to justify your existence. You stop equating your worth with your productivity or your bank balance. You begin to see money as a tool instead of a scoreboard. And here's where things get interesting. When you operate from that place, you actually become better with money. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're thinking clearer. You're less likely to make panic decisions, less likely to chase losses, less likely to overextend yourself for appearances. You're also less susceptible to marketing that preys on insecurity. That's not accidental. A lot of financial products are sold on emotional pain points: fear of missing out, fear of falling behind, fear of being irresponsible. Liquidity dulls those fears, and dulled fears don't drive clicks, applications, or conversions. Nothing about this requires becoming extreme or paranoid. It just requires seeing clearly. Not in an extreme move to the woods way, not in a reject the system way, but in a grounded, realistic way. First, you stop underestimating the power of boring money.
cash isn't exciting. It doesn't have a compelling story. It doesn't promise transformation, but it gives you something far more valuable than excitement. It gives you time. Time to think, time to choose, time to recover. Second, you stop feeling guilty for wanting stability before optimization. A lot of people feel pressure to invest every extra dollar, to maximize returns, to be efficient. But efficiency without emotional safety often backfires. Liquidity is emotional insurance, and insurance isn't supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be there when things go sideways. Third, you recognize that independence doesn't mean isolation. Having $30,000 saved doesn't mean you never use financial products again. It means you use them on your terms. You borrow when it makes sense, not when you're desperate. You invest because you want to grow, not because you're afraid of falling behind. You engage with the system, but you're not trapped inside it. And maybe most importantly, you stop measuring your financial progress by comparison, because the real shift isn't visible. No one sees your lower stress. No one applauds your optionality. No one claps when you quietly say no to something that would have drained you. But you feel it. You feel it when your car makes a weird noise and you don't spiral. You feel it when work gets tense and you know you could leave if you had to. You feel it when life does what life always does and throws something unexpected your way. That's what liquidity buys you. Not status, not luxury, not control over everything, just enough control over yourself. And that's why, in a subtle way, people with real liquidity are harder to manage, harder to scare, and harder to profit from. Not because they're smarter, but because they're calmer. So if you're working towards that level of savings, or even just imagining it, I want you to know something. You're not behind, you're not doing it wrong, and you're not missing out. You're building something most systems don't prioritize, but most humans deeply need. A little space, a little quiet, a little room to breathe. And in a world that constantly pushes urgency, that might be one of the most quietly powerful things you can have. Progress doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be real. And sometimes, $30,000 sitting quietly in the background is doing far more work than anyone realizes.